So my first question is for you, Cèu. And actually, it's what are the vision and plans of the Commission with regards to digital ID? And is there even a potential convergence, perhaps in the future, with the review of PSD2 coming on?
In our retail payment strategy that the Commission adopted in September 2020, we fully recognize the role of digital ID for payments. So it's an integral part of our payments policy. The novelty in our retail payment strategy was indeed to connect the dots in the various areas that are relevant for payments and to ensure the consistency of all the initiatives surrounding payments. Now we also recognize in our strategy that for digital IDs to play a role in payments and in a digital economy, more broadly speaking, there would be a need also to improve the regulatory framework for digital IDs. The eIDAS regulation was already a step forward a few years ago with regard to supporting the use of eIDs, but there was a consensus that we had not gone far enough with the regulation of eIDs at European levels. The revised eIDAS regulation unleashes, let's say, the potential of digital IDs in many fields, and of course payments authentication is one of them, onboarding of customers obviously another one. So this really fits the objectives of our retail payment strategy. Our strategy is all about ensuring coherence. So certainly when we review the PSD2, which we are doing as we speak, we will certainly consider any needed improvements in terms of ensuring legal certainty for transactions with digital identity wallets. As a starting point anyway, the eIDAS regulation ensures that the digital identity wallet can be used to perform strong customer authentication. In addition, of course, it needs to satisfy the current requirements of the PSD2 with regard to, for instance, dynamic linking. So the two pieces of legislation have to be seen together, but if there are any further needs to ensure this wide use of digital IDs in the financial sector and for payments, we will certainly consider them in the context of the PSD2 review. So there's a big opportunity there indeed to ensure that coherence.
And on the other hand, we see also our consumers asking let's say, easier payments, frictionless payments, payments which you don't have to put 6-digit PIN codes in, but things like that. How do you see that evolving in the future?
Some customer authentication requirements in our legislation do not prescribe precise means to perform SCA. So it is also very much for the industry to find the ways that ensure that convenience. And in this regard, again, digital ID can be leveraged. We also receive complaints at the European Commission I would say quite frequently from citizens, for instance, who feel excluded because they have to have a smartphone, their bank requires them to download an app or any other ways that are not convenient for specific customers, and that should not happen because indeed banks need to adapt to the needs of their customers, and again our regulation is not prescriptive in this regard. If we can even do better, we have an opportunity to do so with the PSD2 review, but for now there is already flexibility in the SCA.
Stefan, I have a next question for you, I think. What are your main planned developments for legal entity identification, and how do you see the usage of that in payments?
The first years of the LEI system were driven by the thought of managing systemic risk coming from the financial crisis that we experienced in 2008. Now the focus has shifted completely now to support multiple use cases in multiple industries, multiple verticals, and payment is a very important part of it. We don't do payments just for the sake of it. There's always a use case behind that, whether you receive a salary, you want to pay a bill for goods and services, you want to invest. So there's always a business case where people interact with each other, and payment is an important aspect of that. And we're very delighted to see now that there is some pickup already on the legislation side. For instance, Europe is now mentioning the LEI for the very first time in the AML regulation, or transfer of funds regulation. But in other areas like the European Central Access Point, we'll probably come to talk about open data and these kind of things. The LEI, as we know, is also considered. So there's a lot of good development. And to your point, I couldn't agree more. When you go shopping on Amazon, you wire money to a Chinese firm and you don't even know it, right? So it is a global phenomena, especially in the B2B and B2C case, where corporates operate on a global scale. And we hope that the LEI system is ready to support that. Just to give you an idea where we are at the moment, we have roughly 2.1 million active LEIs. That covers over 90% of global market capitalization. So basically we have the big shops. And the next step in the evolution is to get the corporate hierarchies and the SMEs to adopt the LEI for their own in their own favor.
Next question is for you, perhaps. You are chairing or vice chair of the FIDO Alliance. Yeah, perhaps you can quickly tell what this does, because I think a lot of people are not acquainted with it. And what would you be able to contribute to secure and convenient payments?
So yes, indeed. Today I'm representing the FIDO Alliance. So just a few words about this association, because it's still not very well known in England, despite its almost 10 years of existence. The FIDO Alliance is an association of various industry players that focuses on one subject, which is user authentication. And so in the alliance you find big tech companies, you find security companies of all sizes, from smaller companies to very large companies. You find banks, you find healthcare associations or companies, you find governments. So you've got a broad, let's say, representation of various parts of the industry which are interested in the subject of authentication. And so the FIDO Alliance goal is to produce authentication standards. And so in terms of what the FIDO Alliance can bring, well, that's precisely one aspect of it, which is the standardization part. We were talking just before about interoperability and how standards are useful to reach pan-European solutions. And so standards are important in that respect. But they're also important in terms of what you said, Cèu, because you said that not everybody has a smartphone or wants to use a smartphone. And therefore, in order, with PSD2 in particular, you have to authenticate everyone, not just the happy few that have the smartphone. And so you need to banks need to have a variety of devices, and they need to interoperate. And so this is one aspect that FIDO brings, is the standardization, such that a smartphone will work, but a USB security key will work, a smart card will work, and so on. So this is a very important aspect, standardization, and that will bring the costs down. But another equally important aspect of what FIDO can bring, because that's been the focus from day one, it's really core in everything that the FIDO Alliance does, and that's the user convenience. It's at the heart of all the standards that have been built. The vision of the FIDO Alliance is that when you authenticate, you only have to touch a fingerprint scanner or look at the screen. It has to be super fluid, and that's That's the bread and butter of the FIDO Act. That's what we do.
You say you cannot expect everyone to have a smartphone, but on the other hand, you're talking about devices or USB tokens and things like
I'll
that.
give you an example, because this is, we had a conference not so long ago where a German issuer presented. And actually, they have a fraction of users that, despite having a smartphone, do not want to use it for mobile banking. And so they don't have the app. And if they don't have the app, they don't have the means of authentication provided in the app. And so the bank has decided, therefore, to support also dedicated hardware and that they distribute and issue to those people that do not wish to use the bank app. And so I don't think you can force people. You're right, and there may be incentives and the killer reason to use the smartphone, but at the end of the day, you will have people that don't desire to do so, and so you still have to cope with those.
Okay. Perhaps, Kaisa, that's perfect timing to ask a bit of your experience in Sweden, how that went, because we all know that you're very far evolved in the use of bank IDs and legal IDs and digital IDs. So what's your experience in Sweden about that?
98% of the population in Sweden use bank ID in almost 2 times a day. So it's used everywhere. And 6,000 companies uses bank ID in their services. So this is really a digital ecosystem together with government, banks, and organizations that is built. And I would say that we have been talking a lot of trust today. And I think that bank ID has been building trust in 20 years and built that on 3 pillars. Security. I mean, security is everything we do. It's really in our DNA. And I think that we haven't had any technical breaches during 20 years. And we have a very tight cooperation with 10 banks. We cooperate and share security matters because fraud is, as we all know, increasing. So we need to stick together and fight it together. And also, we don't share any data with anyone else. So that also makes the population feel very secure with bank ID. 96% of the population said that they trust bank ID. And then, so security is number 1. And then we have also talked about user friendliness. And we have also talked about this cooperation. And I think that that has also been very strong in Sweden, among banks, among the government, and to really have the system going.
We briefly touched biometrics. I have a question for the whole panel on how you would see this evolving.
So there is indeed an aspect of trust in biometrics. And there are different angles to this. For example, the trust of banks in the implementation of biometrics. Biometrics are mostly used in smartphones today, at least for banking and payment. But the implementation is done by the vendor of the phone. And so you trust that the vendor of the phone is doing a good job. And so that's a real question, because there were, as far as I can tell, a lot of hesitation on behalf of banks to trust the biometric implementation. We're beginning to see more and more banks adopting fingerprint. But as far as facial recognition is concerned, which offers a far greater user experience actually, because all you have to do is, it's even too simple because you may lose the customer consent with facial recognition. So you have to be sure that you are actually conveying the customer consent because it's so easy to do. But at this stage, I don't see any banks using facial recognition. So there's a question of trust in the implementation that needs to be overcome. But there is another aspect of trust which is now coming from the end user, especially with facial recognition. Really, from my perspective, facial recognition offers a superb user convenience to the extent that you have to be careful of conveying customer consent.
You quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibilities, because I think when you talk about biometrics, it's really huge responsibility.
When we talk about biometrics, we talk about people. We talk about individuals, natural persons. A company does not have a face. And that is the missing piece at the moment. I know that the European Commission is trying to push legislation also for legal entities and everything else. But one thing that is heavily overlooked is the combination of people acting in a business capacity. So Stefan Wolf, CEO of GLEIF, can sign a contract on behalf of GLEIF, but not on behalf of my sports club, because I'm not a director there. So it is the role context that is missing in many of the regulations and the implementations, right? And we're very happy to say that ISO picked this up and they created a role standard where official roles like CEO, CFO, and all these kind of things will be standardized. GLEIF is going to maintain the standard in order to overcome this issue, so to bring people and corporates together in a concrete business case. And one of the examples that I envision in the future is payments, because who is allowed to instruct a payment from a corporate to a supplier, for instance, right? These are people who have functional roles within an organization, and they need to be identified as well.
You talked about the European identity wallet. Yeah? Do you see any possible interactions there or impact on the other initiatives like instant payments or the digital wallet or the digital currency?
Yeah, of course. The fact that the European Digital Identity Wallet can be leveraged for payments and that any, let's say, successful digital identity wallet should have other functions than just to prove your ID, as you said, to pay your taxes, because otherwise it will not be used very widely. Naturally, these considerations also found their way into the European Digital Identity Wallet, and that's why a payments use case is being considered.
I just think that it has been a really interesting discussion, and payment, as you said, someone else will take care of it. I mean, it's really important to be ahead, and because there are big forces within payments. So, yeah, it's really interesting to be here.
Thank you. Alain?
We're living through interesting times because there's all these changes ongoing. Perhaps a word of caution, actually, on there is indeed a lot of interest in including payments in the EU ID wallet. But payments are complicated. There is an ecosystem aspect. And so I think if Europe wants to introduce at the same time an identity wallet that also serves payments, it's making things more complicated, and perhaps we should do things step by step. That would be my...
Thank you. Stefan?
I can only say standards, standards, standards. That's the foundation of everything, and not just the LEI, I mean in general. When we look into the finance industry, and payment is a big part of it, but it's not the entire finance industry. It's like a galaxy with lots of stars circling around the black hole and everything else. We're all focused, on who is doing what and so forth. But we sometimes overlook that we have similar developments and similar exciting galaxies out there coming from a completely different angle. Supply chain and trade I mentioned already, but the one that I wanted to highlight today to watch is the internet space. Most of our commercial activities today use the internet in one way or the other, and the internet standards are developed somewhere else. So that's an area where we believe to watch.
Okay, thank you. Cèu?
Go back to my initial sentence. Digital ID is part of the future. It's part of the future of payments. It's going to be there. And there's a great opportunity to leverage on that to improve our payments ecosystem. If the banking industry doesn't do it, others will do. So I think that's the challenge.